Hello guys, and welcome back to another deep dive GPU comparison between the RX 6800 XT and the RX 9070 XT. I wanted to find out the differences between these two GPUs that launched 5 years apart at 650 MSRP that in reality cost more than that and were both difficult to find. I wanted this comparison to be different from others you may have seen, so we'll dive into artistic detail and look at multiple scenarios, settings, and resolutions. We'll pair these GPUs with a Ryzen 7800 XT. The full parts list will be in the description. With a long road ahead of us, let's begin. We'll start with the very popular Monster Hunter Wilds at 4K first, and then we'll also look at 1440p. We are going to have to use FSR Quality because this game is quite a bit demanding, especially at 4K, both on the GPU and CPU. By the way, ray tracing will be disabled because it doesn't really make a big difference. And I'm also not using the high resolution textures because in this game, you can actually run into some VRAM issues, even with the 16 gig card. If you use the high res texture pack, it doesn't even look that great. Monster Hunter Wilds is one of the games that supports FSR 4, and that is what we're using on the right with the 9070 XT. FSR Quality on both. Now, I'll post the averages and 1% lows for both GPUs on the bottom right corner. And as you can see, the 9070 XT is actually capable of providing a 60 FPS experience, whereas the 6800 XT is having a bit of a trouble with that, and it's in the mid-40s. If we were to summarize the 9070 XT advantage in this comparison, it would be 36% faster on average FPS and 26% faster on 1% lows. That's pretty decent. Nothing major, but it's pretty good. I think 30% is my minimum for considering an upgrade. I'm going to add my own touch here and try something that I call adjusted settings, where we're going to try to see if we can get close to the 9070 XT performance with the 6800 XT by adjusting some settings. And I've dropped FSR to balance and also adjusted some graphical settings and dropped them from their highest to medium and a couple to low. The reason is because upgrading is expensive these days, and I think the 6800 XT is still a quite capable GPU. And by dropping those settings, if we were to compare it to our previous run with the 6800 XT, we went from 44 FPS average to 54. So not quite 60 that we had on the 9070 XT, but pretty close. And on 1% lows, we went from 34 FPS to 41 FPS. We're not quite matching the 9070 XT here, but we did go up 22% faster on average FPS and 20% faster on the 1% lows. Now, could you play this game at this frame rate? I think so, as long as there's no stutters, which there isn't. I think on a VRR display, this would be perfectly playable. You could also throw frame generation if you wanted to. Next, we're going to take a look at 1440p, and we're going to use native FSR AA. We're back to maximum graphical settings, by the way, except for texture quality. I'm going to leave that on high. Trust me, it does make a difference on your frame rate fluidity, but here the 6800 XT catches up a bit, although still not able to average 60 FPS. It's at 49 as a matter of fact, with 36 FPS 1% lows, whereas the 9070 XT has gone beyond 60 FPS to 70 average and 49 FPS 1% lows. It's 42% faster on average FPS and 36% faster on 1% lows. If we were to drop FSR to quality at 1440p, we now have the 6800 XT average 64 FPS, with the 9070 XT going all the way up to 85. And for 1% lows, we're at 46 FPS versus 60 on the 9070 XT. So a very smooth and fluid experience, and we also have the benefit of using FSR 4, which looks quite a bit better. That makes the 9070 XT 32% faster on average FPS and 30% on the 1% lows. So a pretty decent advantage here on the 9070 XT, but nothing massive though. I want to take a quick look at GTA 5 Enhanced because it added a bunch of ray tracing and it's an all-time classic. So we're going to look at 4K, maximum ray tracing preset, and FSR Quality. GTA 5 Enhanced is another game that's supposed to have FSR 4 support, by the way, and if you go into the Adrenaline software, there is a toggle for FSR 4. However, when I went to check to make sure that it was enabled, it said that FSR 4 or FSR 3 hadn't been engaged in the game, when in fact it had. So I don't think it's actually on, but that's besides the point. Maybe it's a bug. But if we compare the 6800 XT with the 9070 XT here, it's a massive difference. The 9070 XT was 75% faster on average FPS and 77% faster on 1% lows. That is a very big advantage, and it shows how much ray tracing has improved in RDNA 4. Even though the GPU has less compute units than the 6800 XT, the compute units are so much improved that it's able to make a massive leap in performance in this particular case. And ray tracing looks really good in GTA 5. All the materials have so much depth and they look so good and accurate. It's really nice. And from what I hear, the game underperforms on AMD GPUs a little bit versus NVIDIA, but still 9070 XT here puts in a solid effort. But can we take things a bit further with the 6800 XT, because 50 FPS average is not really all that bad. If we go with our adjusted settings for the 6800 XT, we could drop FSR to balance and get close to 60, but I don't think that looks very good with FSR 3. Instead, we're going to drop the ray tracing preset to very high and leave FSR 3 to quality. We're still at 4K, by the way. And now we actually push beyond 60 FPS. We average 75 now versus the 49 FPS we had previously, with 67 FPS 1% lows versus 40 FPS we had previously. So that is a pretty decent advantage. 53% on average FPS and 67% on 1% lows. So you could make some settings tweaks and still enjoy some ray tracing with the 6800 XT, and the game still looks very good, as you can see for yourselves. Coming up is Cyberpunk 2077, guys, and we're gonna dig deep into this one. It's full of different settings that you can use, so many things you can do. Let's start with 1440p with ray tracing set to ultra and FSR quality. We've also gone ahead and installed OptiScaler, so we are using FSR 4 on the 9070 XT, which makes the game look so much better. On top of having an image quality advantage on the 9070 XT, we also have a massive performance advantage as well, where we're averaging 78 FPS versus 37 FPS on the 6800 XT. If we look at our averages, the 9070 XT is a little over twice as fast as the 6800 XT, and it's pretty much the same thing if we look at the 1% lows. So Cyberpunk is a really good example, bit of an outlier when it comes to ray tracing performance on the 9070 XT. So very good results here, and actually a bit better than I thought on the 6800 XT. And if we take a look at path tracing, we're going to drop FSR to balance with path tracing enabled. Well, the 6800 XT kind of falls apart really, because we ended up averaging 19 FPS, but the 9070 XT is able to actually do really well with 49 FPS average. The 9070 XT was 150% faster, so more than twice as fast. And on the 1% lows, it's even faster. It's 200% faster, guys. But here's something crazy. Look at the frame time on the 6800 XT. I don't think I've ever seen the frame time look like that ever before. It's almost like it's upside down, right? That is really crazy. But yeah, massive advantage for the 9070 XT here. That said though, you can get 60 FPS with the 9070 XT if you just drop FSR to performance. You might say, well, FSR performance at 1440p? But with FSR 4, guys, it actually looks pretty good. It's so much more stable than FSR 3, and you're able to play Cyberpunk with path tracing enabled, maxed out graphical settings on an AMD GPU, and the 9070 XT is really the only one that can offer that at 60 FPS. And keep in mind that we're also in Dogtown, which is the most demanding part of the game. There's a reason why I'm benchmarking here. If we went back to the Night City area, it would probably get close to 70 FPS. But what about the 6800 XT? Can it do any ray tracing? Well, let's check it out. I do not want to drop below FSR Quality with FSR 3, so that's where I'm going to keep it, and we're going to enable just ray trace reflections on the 6800 XT, and as you can see, the rest of the graphical settings are maxed out, and we're able to get around 60 FPS. I did not want to go below FSR Quality because it doesn't look very good in this game, and it's not really FSR's fault, it's just a bad implementation. That even FSR Quality does have some flickering issues, but balance would have been much worse. That it would not be worth it. But hey, look, you get really nice looking ray traced reflections on the 6800 XT, and keep in mind that we are in Dogtown, the most demanding area in the game, and even though RT Global Illumination would have been nice to also be included, but the lighting in this game looks so good even without ray tracing that I think reflections is a nice touch. There you have it, guys. You can make some tweaks and enjoy a bit of ray tracing with the 6800 XT. An RDNA 2 GPU. Not too bad in my opinion. Now, if you had to say screw ray tracing, I'll just go full rasterization. Well, at 1440p native FSR AA, we're able to average 47 FPS on the 6800 XT, so not quite 60, but on the 9070 XT, we're over 75 average FPS. So the 9070 XT's gap has closed a little bit without ray tracing here, but it still is 59% faster on average FPS and 51% faster on the 1% lows, which is a pretty decent lead actually. But if we drop FSR from native AA to quality, well, our FPS goes through the roof. Now our 6800 XT is averaging 94 FPS versus 126 FPS on the 9070 XT. So that gap has closed a lot, and it could be some sort of a CPU bottleneck that's happening here. It's very possible because the 9070 XT was 34% faster on average FPS and only 13% faster on the 1% lows, so I suspect a CPU bottleneck of some sort here, but still the 9070 XT has an image quality advantage by being able to use FSR 4, even though it's not official. The OptiScaler mod works pretty well. It picks up the slack from AMD. But anyway, I think we've looked at enough of 1440p, all variations of it. Let's take a look at 4K, and we're going to start with ray tracing set to Ultra and FSR performance. I think that's about as good as we can expect to do with these GPUs, even though the 9070 XT's ray tracing performance has improved massively in Cyberpunk. That is still quite demanding, and as you can see, the 9070 XT does really well. We're averaging 60 FPS. 6800 XT though is only averaging 31 FPS. Ray tracing is very demanding in this game, even at 4K. And the 9070 XT is 93% faster on average FPS as a result, and 88% faster on the 1% lows. And that is in Dogtown, by the way. Again, this is the most demanding part of the game. If we go out into Night City, as you can see with the 9070 XT, we're now into the 70s, whereas previously in Dogtown we were in the 60s. 1% lows also see a pretty nice jump, and if we were to look at averages, it's 25% faster in Night City and 27% faster on the 1% lows. That's actually pretty good, and you'll be playing mostly in Night City and inside enclosed areas as well. So yeah, the game can vary, but overall 9070 XT and 6800 XT do pretty well. And if we just look at rasterization at 4K, now we have more room to play with as far as upscaling. So we're gonna go with FSR Quality here. But FSR 4 Quality looks so good on my new 34-inch 4K OLED display, guys. It looks fantastic, even though we don't have ray tracing enabled. Unfortunately, the 6800 XT can't really hit 60 FPS with FSR Quality. Even with ray tracing disabled, we're averaging 43 FPS versus the 65 on the 9070 XT. We saw a 51% advantage on average FPS for the 9070 XT and a 42% for 1% lows for the 9070 XT. So yeah guys, unfortunately the 6800 XT can't really do Cyberpunk at 4K and 60 FPS. Or can it? Well, yes it can. If we go in and adjust some setting, just drop everything to high, and I wanted to leave FSR to quality because I don't really want to go below quality. In Cyberpunk it doesn't look very good. We're still running the game at 4K by the way, and if you drop everything to high, well now you can average a little bit above 60 on the 6800 XT, even in Docktown. And I have to say, the game looks absolutely fantastic. In some games, adjusting the graphical settings doesn't make much of a difference, but in others, it can make a big difference as a matter of fact. Like you see here, even during intense firefights in Docktown, we were able to average 65 overall FPS with 50 FPS for 1% lows. That is very smooth gameplay, guys. We got 39% faster on average and 42% faster on 1% lows just by dropping some graphical settings. We're still targeting 4K and still FSR quality. So like I've shown you in all these games, the 6800 XT can still hold its own pretty well. Although obviously the 9070 XT is, in my opinion, a very good upgrade if that's what you're looking for. But that's enough of Cyberpunk. Let's move on to a favorite game of mine, which is Guardians of the Galaxies. And we're going all out here, guys. We're going with 4K resolution, 100% resolution scale. This game only has FSR 1, by the way. It's a bit older, but we do have beautiful ray trace reflections, transparent reflections, and we've set all of that to ultra. Everything is cranked to the max. I try to always add some game that I feel deserves more attention from other creators, but doesn't, and this falls into that category because this game looks really, really good, has ray tracing, and it's not really as demanding as you might think. I mean, sure, the 6800 XT is only able to average 40 FPS here, but you got to keep in mind that we are running at native 4K with ultra ray traced reflections and transparencies, whereas the 9070 XT is able to average 68 FPS here. It's 70% faster on average and 74% faster on the 1% lows. This game has very good writing, had me laughing out loud when I played it, and I played it on this very 6800 XT with ray tracing years ago. It was awesome. It's one of the games that made me fall in love with ray tracing, actually. Even though we only have access to FSR 1, that doesn't mean that we can't tweak the settings to get a somewhat playable FPS on the 6800 XT with ray tracing. So let's cook something up. And all I did here, guys, was I just set the resolution scale from 100 to 80%. Obviously, I'm not going to use FSR 1.0. And the game still looks fantastic, I have to say. And we got quite a substantial performance jump. We were averaging 40 FPS with 100% resolution scale, and we went all the way up to averaging 63 FPS with 80% resolution scale. And then 1% lows also went up quite substantially. Overall, we were 57% faster on average and 57% faster on 1% lows. That's a pretty good gain, so maybe FSR isn't needed after all. If we disable ray tracing, the game actually still looks really, really good, and the performance goes way up. The 6800 XT is actually able to average around 105 FPS with 87 FPS for 1% lows, and the 9070 XT averages 120 with 102 FPS 1% lows. And if we look at the overall advantage for the 9070 XT, it's only 14% for average FPS and only 17% for 1% lows. Now, I suspect that there could be a CPU limitation here or something like that. I believe the game actually caps at 144 FPS no matter what you do, even if you have a faster CPU. but I suspect that's what could possibly be going on. And also, there are scenes or areas in this game that can be more demanding than some other areas. For example, if we take a look at this gameplay jungle area here I captured with a 9070 XT, and this game is kind of a pain to capture or to load the same area because it has automatic save checkpoints, so it's a nightmare. But as you can see, it is a bit more demanding than the cutscene that we were just watching, although not by a lot. But overall, the game runs fairly well, although there are some stutters in the beginning, what I assume is shader compilation. But anyway, let's move on to Space Marine 2. And I wanted to start at native 4K with TAA, all graphical settings maxed out. Now, this is a game that is quite demanding on both your GPU and CPU. And starting at native 4K, actually, the results were quite interesting because the gap wasn't really that big. The 9070 XT ended up averaging around 50 FPS versus 39 on the 6800 XT. As a matter of fact, if we look at the total advantage of the 9070 XT, it was only 28% on average FPS and 29% on 1% lows, but both don't seem to be able to hit 60. This jungle area is pretty demanding, especially the volumetrics are very demanding, but I wanted to stress them out anyway. But I have a better idea. Let's go ahead and check out FSR. Now, Space Marine 2 is another game that has support for FSR 4, and it actually looks extremely good. Huge difference between FSR 3 and FSR 4 in this game, by the way. It works really well, and it looks really good as well. And what I did here was I fought a few groups of enemies, so we engaged in quite a bit of battles here. And, I mean, we were above 60 pretty much on both GPUs. We averaged 60. Matter of fact, on the 6800 XT with 48 FPS for 1% lows, and on the 9070 XT we averaged 75 FPS with 60 FPS 1% lows, so very smooth gameplay. Bit smoother on the 9070 XT, of course, but if we look at the advantage, again, it wasn't that impressive. The 9070 XT was 25% faster on average FPS and 25% faster on 1% lows. I don't know, but you would think that the gap would be bigger, right? I think RDNA 4 as an architecture may need a bit more attention on the driver side from AMD for it to fully take advantage of the new improvements. At least that's a conclusion I have to come to just looking at the ray tracing performance, which is very impressive in some games, but in other games, not as big as you would expect, and kind of the same thing can happen with rasterization, by the way. Now, what I wanted to try next on the 6800 XT is keep FSR on quality, but I ended up using Benchmark King's optimized settings, and he was able to claw back quite a bit of performance with these settings while keeping image quality loss to a minimum. And yeah, I mean, the game still looks great. I ended up repeating this last battle. I'll leave Benchmark King's video in the description, by the way. I'm pretty sure you guys have probably already seen it, but I wanted to try it and see what type of a gain we would get, and we did see a gain. We went from 60 average FPS previously with the settings maxed out to 71 FPS average with Benchmark King's optimized settings, and for 1% lows we went from 48 FPS to 54 FPS. That is an 18% gain in average FPS and a 12% gain in 1% lows. That's actually not bad because the 9070 XT was 25% faster than the 6800 XT. So just by tweaking some settings, we're able to gain a little bit more performance. We also have access to FSR frame generation as well, by the way. But anyway, let's take a look at 1440p. And we're going to use FSR Native AA this time, and I've also increased the graphical settings back to maximum. And we're totally cooking now, guys. The 6800 XT is averaging 71 FPS with 56 FPS for 1% lows, and we averaged 94 FPS on the 9070 XT with 75 for 1% lows. That is pretty good and solid performance. And again, I have to say how good FSR 4 actually looks. And even though it is 1440p and I'm playing it on my 4K 34-inch OLED display, it looks absolutely fantastic. It looks so good. And if we examine the gap between the two GPUs a bit more closely, 9070 XT was 32% faster on average FPS this time and 34% faster on the 1% lows. That actually is a bigger gain than we saw previously at 4K. For whatever reason, the 9070 XT was falling a bit behind, so I'm not sure why that is. Could it be maybe the memory layout or the higher infinity cache on the 6800 XT? I'm not really sure, but it's interesting nonetheless. Now, if we go ahead and drop some FSR, because why wouldn't you, especially if you have access to FSR 4, it does look pretty much just as good as FSR 4 Native AA. It looks really nice. Totally. And we gained a huge bump in performance, guys. 6800 XT, we averaged 100 FPS with 84 FPS for 1% lows. And on the 9070 XT, we averaged not that much more actually, 117 FPS with 96 FPS 1% lows. Now, I'm pretty sure here we are dealing with a CPU bottleneck, which is not really all that surprising because Space Marine 2 is known for being a very CPU heavy game, and we did go through a battle with quite a few enemies in it. So yeah, 9070 XT, you can actually see it on the GPU utilization. It's dropping below 99%, so it makes sense. It also makes sense that if we examine the gap, it's not going to be that wide. It was only 17% faster in average FPS and 14% faster in 1% lows. Either way though, both GPUs do great here. This feels so good to play. The only thing left to do before we move on to the next game is to check out frame generation. So let's see how far we can take the FPS. And we can take it very, very far, guys, because now we're averaging 175 FPS on the 6800 XT with 145 FPS for 1% lows. And on the 9070 XT, we're at 219 average FPS. I'm almost reaching my monitor's to 240 Hertz refresh rate. This is crazy. And 161 FPS 1% lows. Matter of fact, 1% lows, the 9070 XT was only 9% faster. On average FPS, it was 25%, which is around what we saw previously at 4K. But yeah, the frame generation actually looks really good in this game. We have very high refresh rate display. I mean, the 6800 XT is able to play this game at 4K and at 1440p. At 4K with some tweaks, I recommend Benchmark King's settings and FSR Quality, and you'll get 60 plus FPS. Granted, you have a good CPU. But yeah, that's it for Warhammer Space Marine 2. Let's move on. And we'll jump on The Last of Us Part 2 starting at 1440p with FSR Native AA. This is another game that supports FSR 4. Actually, even FSR 3 looks pretty good in this game. And I'm checking the Seattle area, the beginning of the Seattle area, because this is one of the more demanding areas in the game. So what you're looking at here is worst case scenario. And both GPUs crush it actually. 6800 XT is able to average 68 FPS with 58 FPS 1% lows, so very smooth. 9070 XT is able to average 99 FPS. So what you're looking at here as far as GPU advantage is 45% faster in average FPS and 51% faster in 1% lows. So what you're looking at is essentially what you would expect to see between these two GPUs. And I have a feeling that AMD probably spent some time optimizing their driver for this game because we're not seeing the same gains in some other games like Monster Hunter Wilds or Space Marine 2. But yeah, a gain is a gain, and it's a pretty good one. Pretty good advantage here. But anyway, 1440p, both GPUs can crush it. Let's look at 4K, starting with FSR Native AA. All graphical settings maxed out. They have been throughout this whole benchmark for The Last of Us Part 2 because, for what it's worth, the game is actually pretty well optimized. Now, the 6800 XT is averaging only 42 FPS, but remember, this is native 4K with FSR AA. And FSR AA is actually more costly than just using TAA, so that has to be factored in. The 9070 XT, however, is able to average 64 FPS in this very demanding area with very healthy 59 FPS 1% lows. And if we look at the gap, actually, it's very good. The 9070 XT is 52% faster on average FPS and 59% faster on 1% lows. So a bigger advantage than 1440p was. Not massive, but it is bigger. So that's kind of interesting as well. Now I'm pretty sure we can reach 60 FPS if we take a look at FSR Quality. And now the 6800 XT is able to average 61 FPS. It's pretty good actually, with 53 FPS 1% lows. And the 9070 XT has gone all the way up to 88 FPS with 78 FPS 1% lows. So that's a pretty good advantage there at 4K with FSR Quality. And the lead has shrunk a little, but it's still very good. It's 44% faster in average FPS and 47% faster in 1% low. So pretty good win for the 9070 XT. Now, it is worth mentioning again that this is one of the more demanding areas in the game, and most of the time you will not be in these areas. For example, if we take a look at this indoor areas where you fight a lot of the enemies, as you can see, we went from 61 FPS previously that we were averaging, and now we're getting around 80 something FPS indoors because obviously the environment's changed. On top of all that though, you also have FSR frame generation. Now I didn't look at that, but I heard that the latest patch of the game broke FSR frame generation. That's what I heard. I personally haven't tested it, but I'm pretty sure Nix is going to fix it, as they usually try to stay on top of any issue that arises, like they did with the sharpness. But anyway, we got one more game to take a look at, and that is The Witcher 3 Enhanced. We'll look at it just like we did Cyberpunk in great detail. We'll look at ray tracing, 1440, 4K, all that stuff. We'll start with 4K, ray tracing maxed out, FSR quality, and all the other settings are maxed out as well. Now all we have is FSR 2, and I don't think we're going to see FSR 3 anytime soon because of CD Projekt Red. And to be fair, we may not even want to see it, judging by their implementation of FSR 3 in Cyberpunk. But I digress. Regardless, kudos to them because the next-gen update for Witcher 3 transformed the visuals of the game a lot. I mean, the RTGI and reflections especially look really good, except for in this area. Something seems to be bugging out. But either way, it is demanding. The 6800 XT is not only experiencing more stutter than the 9070 XT, but it's only averaging 30 FPS versus 53 on the 9070 XT. The 9070 XT has a 76% advantage on average FPS and 100%, twice as fast in 1% lows. That's pretty good. But don't get too excited because some areas are more demanding than others in this game. Like, for example, entering this forest here. We started off very close to 60 FPS on the 9070 XT outside the city, and entering this forest we've dropped all the way down into the low 40s. So it looks like performance can vary a bit depending on the type of environment that you're in. But I'd say overall the 9070 XT is able to provide a 4K ray tracing experience that looks really good in this game, despite some drops below 60. As long as you're within the VRR range, it's not so bad. Can we do anything with the 6800 XT at 4K and ray tracing? Well, let's check it out. Compromises are going to have to be made, and we have made compromises. We've disabled ray trace reflection, shadows, and AO, and even set RTGI to performance from quality with FSR balance on top. And making these changes, we went from 30 average FPS previously to 53 FPS average now. And 1% lows went up by 43% as well. So pretty decent gains here. This is what I'd say is the ray tracing experience on the 6800 XT on Witcher 3. The fact that we can even make it work to some extent is fairly impressive if you think about it. Now, disabling ray tracing is another option. It's a pretty good option. The game still looks very good, so that's what we're trying here. We're disabled ray tracing and we're using TAAU at 100% resolution scale, so no upscaling happening here at all. And it looks like the 6800 XT is struggling a little bit here, actually quite a bit versus the 9070 XT. We averaged 35 FPS versus 63 FPS on the 9070 XT. So that is an 80% gain in average FPS for the 9070 XT and 78% gain in 1% lows. And this is rasterization only, so a massive win for the 9070 XT. I don't know if RDNA 4 just works really well with the Red engine, or if it's some type of driver optimization AMD's made. Imagine if they were able to do this for Unreal Engine 5 and 4 and all the other games. That would be insane. But yeah, this is quite impressive. Big wins for the 9070 XT here. But we can also try to make some tweaks for the 6800 XT to get a 60 average FPS experience, and we're just going to drop FSR to quality to do this. Playing with the graphical settings didn't really change the FPS much, that's why I went with FSR Quality. And if you look at the left side with TAAU at 100% resolution scale, we went from 35 average FPS all the way to 63 average FPS on the 6800 XT with FSR Quality. That is a gain of 80% in average FPS and 75% on the 1% lows. So that is really good. Now, yes, you could do these changes on the 9070 XT as well and get even higher FPS. But what I'm trying to say is that the 6800 XT is still a very capable GPU at 4K. And with how prices and availability with GPUs is these days, I think the 6800 XT is still very good. I mean, we saw it here at 4K with rasterization. You can max everything out, just drop FSR to quality, and whether it be the countryside, even entering the wooded area actually, sure, you will drop into the low 50s, high 40s occasionally. You're still within the VRR range, and it's still a very pleasant experience. We also saw how you could even try to enable ray trace global illumination. Yes, it is the lowest setting and the only ray tracing setting you can use at 4K, but it is doable. And 6800 XT still delivers on basically playing all the latest games. Especially at 1440p, this GPU is a monster. And if we do drop to 1440p with maximum ray tracing, TAAU again 100% resolution scale, the 9070 XT is actually able to average 65 FPS and very good 52 FPS 1% lows. The 6800 XT is at 38 FPS average, which isn't too bad. We are running at 1440p native with ray tracing maxed out, but the 1% lows were pretty bad at 17 FPS. We noticed a lot more stuttering on the 6800 XT in this run, whereas on the 9070 XT it was much smoother. Now this is something I've noticed in general with RDNA 2, is that those GPUs did tend to have a bit of a hitching issue with some games that AMD improved a lot with RDNA 3 and especially RDNA 4. And you can see that in this run where the 9070 XT is over 3 times faster on the 1% lows. Average is 71%, about what you would expect. Now, there is a lot of room for tweaking that we can do with the 6800 XT, especially at 1440p. That gives us a bit more room to play with. So what we're going to do is we're going to go from 100% resolution scale with TAAU to FSR Quality. This should allow us to get a big bump in performance. We were averaging 38 FPS previously, and now we're already into the 50s in the same area, so that is a pretty decent gain actually. And we have the full benefit of ray tracing, but there are more demanding areas in this game, as I showed you guys previously. And if we try to make our way into this town, we will drop below 50, as you can see, into the mid to high 40s. Now you're still within VRR range here, so it's not bad, and it doesn't look too bad on my OLED display with FreeSync Premium Pro or whatever they're calling it these days. It works fairly well. But if we try to get 60 all the time, disable ray trace reflections, shadows, and AO, but keep RTGI at quality, which is at its fullest, because that is the most impactful ray trace setting in the game. And it actually works quite well. It maintains very close to 60, whether you're outside into the countryside, which actually looks stunning, by the way. This game, the next gen update made this game, which looked good to begin with. It looks so much better now. But even if we enter the wooded area, running fast with the horse, it actually stays very close to 60. So at 1440p, you could actually enjoy the full benefits of ray trace global illumination, maybe even reflections. That'll keep you fairly close to 60. It does quite well. At 4K, it's going to be a lot more difficult for the 6800 XT, so I wouldn't really recommend compromising. But at 1440p, 6800 XT is a monster still. no problem. You could even play with ray tracing in a lot of games. It's very capable. That was ray tracing, but in rasterization, well, both of these GPUs are going to be monsters at 1440p. There's no reason to even bother with FSR. We're just going to go straight 100% resolution scale with TAAU because we can't even use FSR AA, but both GPUs crush it, guys. As you can see, the 6800 XT is averaging 74 FPS with 65 FPS 1% lows, and the 9070 XT is averaging 123 FPS with 106 FPS 1% lows. That still gives the 9070 XT a massive 66% advantage in average FPS with 60% advantage in 1% lows. So yeah, guys, the 9070 XT is a pretty decent upgrade from the 6800 XT. But the 6800 XT is still a very capable GPU, still to this day. And with a 16GB VRAM buffer, it should hold up fairly well into the future. We saw the 9070 XT in this video be as little as 20-something% faster than the 6800 XT, all the way to 2 to 3 times faster with path tracing in Cyberpunk. Now, if we were to add everything up and come up with an average, the 9070 XT was 55% faster in average FPS and 61% faster in 1% lows. So yeah, very smooth. In conclusion then, this video turned out to be much longer than I'd anticipated, and a lot longer to put together as well, so I hope that it was worth it and informative to you guys. I didn't want it to be just another quick comparison though, not that there's anything wrong with that, but I think there is value into a more deeper and thorough look into the different games that are popular. Another motivation for this comparison was the current GPU market. It's a bit of a mess. MSRP doesn't mean much, and stock can be non-existent, depending on where you live, of course. So what I wanted to focus on as part of the overall message is that maybe, just maybe, you don't really have to upgrade. It's easy to get caught up in the hype and FOMO with the amount of Discord and different videos that we make. I wanted to show that a 5-year-old GPU like the 6800 XT is still very capable and able to provide an enjoyable PC gaming experience. Now, is the 9070 XT the perfect upgrade to the 6800 XT? Well, maybe not perfect, but it's pretty close. My personal standard is that anything less than 30% is not worth upgrading. But ideally, I'd like to see 50% or more increase in performance at around a similar price. The 9070 XT meets that. Well, maybe not the price these days, but it can also surpass it in ray tracing, as you guys saw. It can be 2 times faster. Now, let's also not forget the fact that FSR 4 is a massive improvement over FSR 3, so that is a very nice bonus for the 9070 XT. Ultimately, though, it is up to you guys what you want to do, as it's your money and you know your situation and tastes better than anyone. The way I've always looked at every review or benchmark comparison content is that it serves to inform me to make a better decision, not some reviewer telling me what I should or shouldn't buy. So I hope this video was informative in some way, be it for purchasing or just out of curiosity. That'll be all though. Please give the video a like if you liked it and subscribe for more. Until the next time. Bye bye.